It's easy to think of big policy changes happening only uh, up on Capitol Hill, right? Laws getting debated and passed.
Yeah, that's what gets most of the headlines.
But the reality is, a lot of what impacts our daily lives, maybe in ways we don't even see right away, comes directly from the White House, through executive actions.
Exactly. Things like executive orders, proclamations, memoranda. These are really powerful tools.
Powerful how?
Well, the executive branch uses them to tell federal agencies what to do, manage how the government runs, implement policy,
Yeah.
often much faster than waiting for legislation.
And they have real effects, you're saying, like on-the-ground effects.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Direct effects. Which brings us to what we're digging into today.
Right. We've got this stack of recent documents, straight from the White House, the actual official language, the directives, what they say they intend.
And our job here is just to unpack that. What do these documents actually say? What actions are they ordering? And what effects do they claim they'll have?
We're looking at it purely based on the source material provided, trying to understand the what and why directly from the text.
And this collection, it really gives us a window into the administration's priorities right now, how they're using that executive authority.
It covers a lot of ground, too, based on what's here.
Yeah, a really broad spectrum. We're talking immigration enforcement, the whole complex world of government regulation, public health support for veterans.
And even, you mentioned this earlier, standards for things like washing machines and showers.
Yep, even appliance standards. It's all in here.
Okay, let's get into this stack then. Where should we start? Maybe with the topic that often grabs headlines. Immigration.
Sounds good. First up, we have a proclamation. It's titled Establishing Project Homecoming.
Okay.
And right off the bat, this document uses some very specific and strong language to frame the situation.
How so?
It describes what it calls a full-scale invasion of aliens entering and remaining in the country illegally. That's the term used.
Invasion. Wow. And what does it claim is resulting from this?
It claims this is causing a relentless onslaught of crime, vagrancy, violence, and death in countless American communities. Pretty stark framing.
And it connects this directly to costs, right? Burdens on communities.
It does. It states the impact includes limiting the capacity of schools and hospitals and diverting billions of dollars in federal, state, and local social services from Americans in need.
Is there a specific dollar figure mentioned?
There is. The proclamation claims that in fiscal year 2023 alone, the estimated costs covering things like healthcare, food stamps, public housing, emergency services, education, shelter, and even costs it attributes to crimes committed by illegal aliens exceeded $150 billion in taxpayer dollars.
$150 billion. That's the figure cited in the document itself.
Exactly. So based on that description of the problem, Project Homecoming is set up, the stated goal, to create processes for the rapid departure of illegal aliens.
Rapid departure. What does that involve, according to the text?
It includes specific directives, like funding free return home flights. The federal government pays for these if people voluntarily depart permanently.
Free flights. Anything else?
Yes. There's also mention of an exit bonus for those who voluntarily leave permanently.
An exit bonus.
Yeah, and the document even directs the creation of get this, a concierge service at airports.
A concierge service?
Yeah.
For what?
To help people arrange this travel and claim the bonus. These are, very detailed operational directives coming straight from the White House.
And so that's the voluntary side. What about those who don't leave?
Well, the proclamation is very explicit about that, too. It outlines sweeping consequences for those who choose to remain illegally present.
Sweeping consequences like?
It lists them out, stating they're consistent with applicable law for immigration crimes. Removal, prosecution, incarceration, fines, garnishing wages.
Okay, standard enforcement tools.
And notably, the confiscation of savings and personal property. It specifically lists homes and vehicles.
Confiscation of homes and vehicles. That seems significant. Does the document address how feasible or, legal that is?
The document just lists it as a consequence consistent with applicable law. The feasibility or specific legal basis isn't debated within the proclamation itself, but it's definitely a stated consequence.
How do they plan to enforce all this?
Well, it directs the Secretary of Homeland Security to dramatically increase the enforcement force by no less than 20,000 officers.
20,000. How quickly?
Within just 60 days.
60 days. Wow. Where are these officers coming from?
The directive includes authorizing the deputization of state and local law enforcement, former federal officers, and even personnel from other federal agencies. A very broad mandate to find personnel fast.
So summing up this proclamation based on the text,
Yeah.
The stated intent is massive taxpayer savings, that $150 billion figure again, and relief for public services they claim are overburdened.
Right. And the mechanism is rapid removal, pushed by incentives for leaving voluntarily and pretty severe stated penalties for staying. It frames the issue in stark terms and prescribes a very aggressive, rapid enforcement response.
Including that potential property confiscation point,
Yeah.
which is definitely highlighted in the text. Okay, let's shift gears a bit. What about government regulation and the economy? There are several documents on that, right?
Yes, quite a few. Let's start with an executive order called Fighting Overcriminalization in Federal Regulations.
Overcriminalization. Sounds like it's aimed at the sheer number of rules.
Exactly. It points to the massive size of the Code of Federal Regulations. The document says over 175,000 pages.
That's a lot of pages.
And it notes this code contains hundreds of thousands of potential criminal offenses. A key issue flagged is that many are strict liability offenses.
Strict liability. What does that mean in plain English?
Good question. The order explains it means you don't need a guilty mental state. The legal term is mens rea to be convicted.
So you could technically be found guilty of a crime for breaking a rule you didn't even know existed, or didn't mean to break.
That's the concern raised in the document. It argues this situation allows for potential executive branch abuse and weaponization.
And it claims this favors big companies.
Yes, it says it privileges large corporations that can afford big legal teams to track all these rules, while average Americans or small businesses might unknowingly violate something and face criminal charges.
So the stated goal is to help out the little guy, basically. Prevent people from becoming accidental criminals.
That's the stated purpose. Ease the burden on everyday Americans and stop criminalizing unwitting individuals.
Okay, so what does it actually do? What are the directives?
The core directive is that criminal enforcement of these regulatory offenses is now disfavored.
It is favored, meaning
Meaning prosecution is considered most appropriate only when someone knew their conduct was unlawful and it caused actual harm. For those strict liability offenses, agencies are told to lean towards civil or administrative penalties, not criminal ones.
interesting. Any other key actions?
A big one, I think. Within a year, agencies have to report all criminal regulatory offenses they enforce. This list has to be made public and updated every year.
A public list of all regulatory crimes.
Yes, and the order says enforcing any offense not on that official list is strongly discouraged.
Huh. And for new rules.
Any future rule that might create a criminal offense has to spell it out clearly. Identify the offense, the law it's based on, and the mens rea required that guilty mental state.
So the stated benefit is transparency, making it harder to, accidentally fall foul of some obscure rule, especially for individuals or small businesses without huge legal departments. Trying to level the playing field, as the document suggests.
Exactly. But there's a really important exception written right into the order.
Oh, what's that?
It explicitly states that this entire order, the preference for civil penalties, the public list, all of it, shall not apply to the enforcement of the immigration laws or regulations, nor shall it apply to the enforcement of laws or regulations related to national security or defense.
So the protections against unwitting violations don't apply in immigration or national security contexts.
According to the text of this specific order, no. That's a significant carve-out defining the scope.
Okay, sticking with regulation, there's another order focused just on the process, right? The Federal Register.
That's right. The executive order on increasing efficiency at the Office of the Federal Register.
And the Federal Register is... Remind me.
It's basically the official newspaper of the federal government. It's where agencies publish all their proposed and final rules, notices, presidential documents, everything.
Got it. So what's the problem this order identifies?
Publication delays. The order claims delays at the OFR slow down the administration's stated deregulatory agenda.
So it's taking too long to publish rules, including rules that remove other rules.
That's the claim. And it says this wastes taxpayer money, too, even citing a cost of $151 to $174 per column to publish things there.
And the stated goal.
To foster prosperity by freeing Americans from the heavy burden of federal regulations. It wants to make the process for removing regulations simple.
So how does it propose to do that?
Pretty straightforward directives, actually. Reduce the delays, modernize systems, cut bureaucracy. The head of the office, the archivist, needs to report on how long things are taking and review the fees charged, trying to base them on actual costs and reflect any new efficiencies.
So the idea here is speed up the paperwork, especially for deregulation, and that helps achieve the administration's economic goals, as stated in the order.
Pretty much, faster publication, especially of deregulation actions, is presented as a way to reduce the regulatory burden and thus foster prosperity. Who benefits most immediately would likely be industries subject to those regulations being changed or removed.
Okay, now there's an order that focuses regulation or deregulation on a specific sector.
Pharmaceuticals.
Yes, the executive order on regulatory relief to promote domestic production of critical medicines.
What's the problem it's trying to solve? It talks about critical barriers and information gaps holding back a domestic pharmaceutical supply chain.
Like what kind of barriers?
It says building new manufacturing plants takes 5–10 years and points the finger at regulations, building codes, zoning, environmental rules. It also mentions FDA inspections, claiming they happen more often for domestic plants than foreign ones. Even expanding existing factories is described as difficult due to permits.
So the stated goal is to make it easier and faster to make medicines here in the U.S.
Exactly. To eliminate those regulatory hurdles, boost domestic production, and make the U.S., quote, the most competitive nation for pharmaceutical manufacturing.
What are the specific actions ordered?
Key agencies like Health and Human Services and the FDA have 180 days to review their rules and guidance. They need to find ways to cut requirements that are duplicative or unnecessary, speed things up, and generally streamline the whole process for getting domestic manufacturing going.
And you mentioned foreign facilities.
Right. There's a specific directive for the FDA to improve inspections of foreign manufacturing sites within 90 days.
Improve how? More inspections.
It doesn't explicitly say more, but improve, and it states this improvement effort should be funded by increasing fees on those foreign facilities. It also requires the FDA to publicly report how many foreign inspections it conducts.
Interesting. What about environmental rules?
The EPA is also involved. It's directed to update its regulations and guidance for domestic pharma plants within 180 days and to act as the lead agency for environmental permits for these projects.
And the Army Corps of Engineers, too.
Yes, they need to review their permits within 180 days to see if a specific type is needed to help speed up pharma manufacturing construction.
So the intended benefit, according to the document, is a more secure, maybe more affordable supply of critical medicines for Americans, made here.
That's the stated aim. And the direct beneficiaries of the streamlining efforts would be the pharmaceutical companies looking to build or expand manufacturing in the U.S.
And the part about increasing fees and scrutiny on foreign facilities seems designed to, well, level the playing field or perhaps encourage more domestic production indirectly.
That appears to be the logic presented in the order, yes. Using fees on foreign producers to fund improved oversight while easing burdens domestically.
Okay, now for something that might hit a little closer to home for some folks, there's a presidential memorandum with a very blunt title.
Yes, the rescission of useless water pressure standards.
Useless. Doesn't mince words. What does it say inside?
The language is just as direct. The memo claims that existing water conservation rules for things like faucets, showers, toilets make them more expensive and less functional.
Less functional, like bad shower pressure.
That seems to be the implication. It makes a similar argument about energy efficiency standards for clothes washers and dishwashers, claiming the standards make them less useful, more breakable, and more expensive to repair.
Okay, so it's arguing these efficiency standards actually make appliances worse.
That's the core premise stated in the memo. The federal government should not impose or enforce regulations that make taxpayers' lives worse. It goes on to explicitly call these standards unnecessary radical green agenda policies.
Radical green agenda policies. Wow. So what does it direct the government to do?
It directs the Secretary of Energy to use their lawful authority to rescind or amend the specific regulations covering water and energy use for these appliances.
Okay, so start the process to formally change the rules.
Yes, but significantly, it also directs the Secretary of Energy not to enforce these specific rules or even parts of the underlying statutes from the Energy Policy Act of 1992 while that rescission process is happening.
Wait, it tells them to just stop enforcing the current law and regulations before they're officially changed.
That's what the memorandum directs, yes. Pending rescission or reversion, it's a notable use of executive discretion regarding enforcement.
And it wants Congress involved, too.
It directs that recommendations be sent to Congress within 60 days, suggesting they repeal the related statutes, or maybe even repeal the entire Energy Policy Act of 1992.
So the stated goal is better functioning, maybe cheaper appliances for consumers.
That's the pitch. But the directive to simply stop enforcing existing laws and rules raises questions about process, compared to the standard way of formally changing regulations through rulemaking. And of course, it sets aside the energy and water conservation goals those standards were originally meant to achieve. There are potential trade-offs there regarding utility bills long-term, resource use, environmental impact.
Right. The memo focuses entirely on function and upfront cost as defined problems.
And just quickly to round out this theme, there's also a proclamation for National Small Business Week in the documents.
Mostly symbolic, I assume.
Largely, yes. But like some others, it weaves in policy claims. It talks about challenges small businesses face: inflation, regulation, trade, and promotes deregulation, tax cuts, tariffs as the solutions, aiming for a new golden age.
So it uses that occasion to reinforce the broader economic message about reducing regulatory burdens.
Exactly. It fits with the themes we saw in the other orders focused on regulation.
Okay, let's move to the last major area. Actions focused on social welfare, specific groups, or public safety. What do we have there?
A significant one is the executive order on keeping promises to veterans and establishing a national center for warrior independence.
Keeping promises. What promises does it say haven't been kept?
It directly states the federal government has not always treated veterans like the heroes they are. It specifically criticizes the previous administration, alleging they rehired VA employees fired for misconduct.
And it mentions a specific location.
Yes, the West Los Angeles VA Medical Center. It highlights that land donated specifically for disabled veterans ended up being leased to private entities. The order connects this directly to veteran homelessness in the area.
Does it give numbers?
It does. It cites approximately 3,000 homeless veterans in LA as of 2024, calling it about 10% of the national total, according to the document.
So what are the goals of this order?
The stated goals are accountability at the VA, giving veterans more choices in their care and benefits, and restoring veteran self-sufficiency.
And the key actions directed.
A major one is designating a national center for warrior independence right there on that West LA campus, specifically for homeless veterans.
A dedicated center. Is there a target for how many it will help?
Yes, a stated goal to house up to 6,000 veterans there by January 1st, 2028. It also says to make sure veterans outside LA can access it too.
How is this center being funded? This sounds expensive.
This is a very explicit point in the order. It directs the administration to redirect funds that may have been spent on illegal aliens to build and maintain this center.
Wow. Okay, so it directly links the funding for this veteran initiative to money it claims might have gone elsewhere, specifically mentioning illegal aliens.
That's precisely what the text states. It frames the resource allocation very directly.
What else does the order do for veterans?
It directs action plans for restoring self-sufficiency housing, substance abuse treatment, help getting back to work within 120 days. It backs a voucher program. It mandates steps to restore accountability at the VA, looking into those past rehirings and directing any recovered funds back to veteran care.
Any changes to health care delivery itself?
Yes, it calls for a plan within 60 days to reduce VA wait times. Also, a quick 30-day study on the feasibility of a full-service VA center in Manchester, New Hampshire, and a broader strategy for more efficient healthcare, possibly even using military facilities for treatment.
So this seems like a comprehensive set of actions aimed squarely at veterans, especially homeless vets and those needing care, with a very specific and perhaps politically charged funding mechanism stated for the LA Center.
Based on the text, yes. It lays out direct benefits and services for veterans and explicitly frames the resource allocation in relation to other groups.
Okay, what's next in this category?
We have an executive order on improving the safety and security of biological research. This one deals with controlling certain kinds of scientific research.
Like what kind?
The order focuses on what it calls dangerous gain-of-function research. It provides a definition and claims this type of research endangers citizens, potentially causing widespread mortality, harming public health, disrupting lives, and diminishing security.
Does it blame anyone or anything?
It criticizes prior funding decisions, specifically mentioning funding for research done by foreign entities in, quote, countries of concern, like China, or research conducted without adequate oversight.
So the goal is tighter control.
Pretty much. The stated policy is to ensure U.S.-funded research helps citizens without creating new risks to security or health. It talks about balancing risk prevention with maintaining U.S. leadership in biotech and biosecurity.
What does it actually order agencies to do?
Immediately stop federal funding for this defined dangerous gain-of-function research if it's done by foreign entities in those countries of concern, or if it lacks adequate oversight. It also stops funding for other potentially threatening life science research abroad.
What about research done inside the U.S.?
Federally funded domestic dangerous gain-of-function research is also suspended immediately, pending a policy review.
A full stop, pending review. What else?
Existing oversight policies need to be revised within 90 to 120 days to be stronger, more oversight, accountability, transparency, enforcement. It also asks for a strategy within 180 days to deal with dangerous research that isn't federally funded.
How does it increase accountability?
Through more public transparency, like publicly reporting on research that's been stopped or suspended where the law allows. And it mandates putting teeth into research grants and contracts. Compliance becomes essential for payment. Researchers have to certify about foreign work, and funding can be revoked or they can be barred from future funding if they don't comply.
So this order aims to lock down perceived risks from certain biological research, both here and abroad, using funding controls, suspensions, and stricter oversight as the main tools.
Yes, that's the approach outlined. It's presented as a necessary measure for public health and national security, aiming to prevent accidental or deliberate release of dangerous pathogens developed through this kind of research.
Okay, one more in this section, something about invasive carp.
That's right, a presidential memorandum on protecting the Great Lakes from invasive carp, a very specific environmental and economic issue.
Invasive carp, why are they such a problem?
The memo highlights they threaten the whole Great Lakes economy and ecosystem. We're talking fishing, boating, tourism, jobs, water quality across 8 states. The big fear is them getting into the Great Lakes and wrecking native fish populations.
Is there a solution identified?
Yes. It points to something called the Brandon Road Interbasin Project near Joliet, Illinois, as the key choke point to stop them. It notes $274 million in federal funding is already there, and the project is ready to build.
So what's the holdup according to the memo?
It explicitly points to the state level, saying the Illinois governor delayed necessary land acquisition back in February 2025.
So the memo directs action to fix this.
It does. It tells the federal administration to work at maximum speed and efficiency. But significantly, it also explicitly directs the state of Illinois to get that land by July 1st, 2025, a specific deadline.
It directs the state government.
Yes, and tells Illinois to grant the needed permits within 30 days after that. It also directs federal agencies like the EPA, NOAA, and Fish and Wildlife Service to streamline their reviews and prioritize funding and research related to carp control and this project.
So it's using federal authority to push a specific federally funded project forward by setting deadlines for state action, aiming to protect that regional economy and environment.
Exactly. It's a very targeted use of the memorandum tool to address a specific bottleneck involving federal and state cooperation, or lack thereof, as presented in the document.
And then we had those other proclamations,
Yeah.
right? Mostly symbolic.
Mostly, yeah, but they often serve to highlight administration priorities or values, like the Military Spouse Day Proclamation.
What did that one say?
It honored military spouses, acknowledged their sacrifices and challenges, citing things like a 21% unemployment rate and a 25% wage gap, according to the text. It also mentioned administration efforts to help, like boosting federal job opportunities, license portability, remote work, and a return-to-office exemption for military spouse federal employees.
Oh.
So, symbolic but touching on concrete issues.
Okay. What about Mother's Day?
That proclamation honored mothers, of course, but also stated the administration's commitment to empowering families by, and these are quotes from the text, defending the God-given dignity of every human life, born and unborn, making treatments affordable, defending the child tax credit, and protecting parental rights from far-left ideology. So, policy stances woven into the commemoration.
And Foster Care Month.
Honored foster families and kids, highlighted their role, mentioned the Family First Prevention Services Act and the kinds of support it provides, like mental health services, and encouraged more families to get involved.
Mental Health Awareness Month.
That one recognized the impact of mental health challenges, mentioned a Make America Healthy Again Commission, and veteran support efforts.
Hurricane Preparedness Week.
Raised awareness, mentioned supporting recovery, and emphasized giving state and local authorities a bigger role in disaster response.
And Victory Day for World War II.
That one seemed purely commemorative, celebrating the historical event, honoring veterans, and mentioning a commitment to stopping foreign wars and being a peacemaker. So, yeah, these proclamations use national observances to communicate values, highlight specific groups or issues, and sometimes reinforce broader policy themes seen elsewhere.
So when you step back and look at this whole collection of documents we've
You
discussed,
really see the different ways the White House uses these tools. Executive orders setting broad policy for agencies, like on regulatory enforcement.
right, or presidential memoranda drilling down on very specific issues, like the appliance standards or the invasive carp project, sometimes even giving direct instructions, to specific actors like a state government.
Exactly. And then proclamations, which might seem just symbolic, but as we saw, can carry policy messages or really frame the administration's priorities on certain issues or for certain groups.
The topics covered are just incredibly diverse, too, from huge things like immigration enforcement and its stated multi-billion-dollar costs.
To national security concerns about biological research, down to very specific regulations affecting maybe pharmaceutical companies or even just the water pressure in your shower.
And targeted initiatives for veterans or communities around the Great Lakes.
It's a wide range, and again, we've just been walking through what these specific documents say, the directives, the stated reasons, the language used, all based solely on the source material provided.
It makes you think about how these different tools, orders, memos, proclamations actually function.
Right.
An executive order telling agencies how to enforce regulations feels different from a memo telling them not to enforce a law, right?
It absolutely does. One sets ongoing policy, the other is a more direct, maybe temporary intervention and enforcement. Or consider the difference between an order setting up a review process versus one demanding action by a specific date, like with the Great Lakes Project.
And the language itself. Think
Yeah.
about the contrast between the really strong, evocative language in that Project Homecoming proclamation, invasion onslaught, versus the much more technical language in the regulatory orders.
Or the very direct, almost dismissive language in the useless water pressure standards memo, calling them radical green agenda policies. That framing itself sends a clear message.
How does the way an issue is framed in these official documents shape how you, the listener, might understand the problem and the proposed solution? Does it influence what kind of action you expect?
And looking at the different approaches, broad policy shifts, targeted interventions, enforcement discretion, symbolic gestures, how do these varied uses of executive power, all detailed in these documents, actually play out? What are the real world impacts versus the stated intentions? That's really the key question these sources leave you to ponder.